Welcome to the latest edition of the Best Fleets podcast. I'm your host, Chris Henry. For this edition, we'll be joined by Andrew Boyle. Andrew is the co-president of Boyle Transportation. Boyle Transportation is a 7-time participant as well as a 7-time winner of the Best Fleets to Drive Our program, and they were named an overall winner in 2020. Before I jump on with Andrew, I wanted to get a deeper perspective on Boyle from our very own Mark Morrell. Mark has interviewed Boyle multiple times over the past 7 years in which they've participated and can provide some insight into why they are unique and also a perennial winner. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you. And as mentioned, I'm about to interview Andrew Boyle from Boyle Transportation. What are your observations about the company? What makes them unique? What makes them tick? What stands out to you about them?
Well, a lot. Boyle is a company I'm always interested in talking about. I didn't know them from a hole in the ground the first time they were in the program, the first time they were nominated. And that's often the case. These fleets come in and they're kind of brand new. We don't know much about them. We don't know all of the players in the industry. So when a fleet gets nominated, it's kind of an adventure to learn about who they are and what they're all about. And I went through and did the interview with them the first time and was blown away by some of the things that they do for their drivers. And it was one of those where in the older times when there wasn't very many of us doing the interviews, when one of us would have something really exciting or a really noteworthy interview, would sort of rush after and tell the others, or at lunch we'd be talking about it like, oh, these guys, you wouldn't believe what these people are doing. And Boyle was one of those interviews where they were talking about some of the things that they were doing. And Andrew in particular, who's always been the point person on their interviews, Andrew in particular was talking about some of the things they did as if it was completely logical to do it that way. And he couldn't understand that people weren't. And it was stuff that nobody else was doing at the time. And it really jumped out at us as really unique, really progressive, and stuff that really should be happening at everybody in the industry. And it was the kind of thing that made us sort of change the questionnaire. And that's always excellent when we have somebody who comes in who has an answer to a question that forces us to look in a different way and forces us to look at something in a way that we haven't really before, or consider another possibility. And we end up changing the questionnaire or changing the survey or something as a result of that. There's only been a handful of those things that have happened in the past, and it's always really exciting. So for Boyle, there was a couple of things that they were doing that even now, like 7 years later, are still pretty rare in the industry. And the one that stuck out to me because it was so simple is they actually give their drivers an email account. And I was like, yeah, nobody does that. Why is that? Nobody gives their drivers a corporate email account. You talk about how drivers are so important and they're the lifeblood of the company and all of this, but they don't even have a corporate email address. They have to use their personal account. So it really totally undercuts that argument that drivers are super important if you can't spend $5 a year and get them an email address. And Boyle did that. And we're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And of course, it's so much easier to communicate with people, keep them in the loop and feel like part of a team. And Andrew also made the comment that when drivers start with them, they also get an iPhone. So they get an iPhone and a corporate email address. And he said, well, it's like you would do with a salesperson. You have a salesperson, you give them a laptop, cell phone, an email address, business cards. Why not do the same thing for the drivers? And when he says that, of course, we're like, yes, of course, you absolutely should do that. But a lot of other people hadn't even considered it. Most of the industry still doesn't provide email accounts for their drivers.
Not at all.
And
no.
It's kind of weird. It's not an expensive thing. And I think in many cases, it's just something they never considered before. So they totally changed that part of the questionnaire just by what they were doing. So it was very interesting. That another one is their guaranteed pay program, which they were one of the early people to really talk about that and to really show how it totally changes the approach to drivers and the approach to everything that the business does. So they have a guaranteed pay program that gives people a pretty healthy amount of minimum miles that they're paid for each week. And as a result, things like waiting time at shippers is a whole lot less of an issue. So, in Andrew's answer, I still remember it. He wrote it down and he said it, and it was so perfect. He's like, well, we're paying the drivers anyway, so this is an operational problem. This is on us to make sure that they're not sitting around, which is so opposite from how everybody else looks at these things.
Yeah, it provides the incentive for the company to say, okay, we have to solve this issue. But without that, they have less of an incentive to do so. So that's a very good point.
Well, there's been such a history of just dumping everything down on the driver.
Mhm.
Traffic is the driver's problem. Waiting time at shippers is the driver's problem. Equipment problems, that's the driver, because the driver's just getting paid to drive. So none of the other things are compensated for. So it's real easy for the business to kind of get lazy and say, well, it's not costing us anything. We're not making revenue, but we're not having any expense. So it really doesn't matter that much. But when you flip it around to something like what Boyle has done and say, well, drivers are getting paid anyway, oh crap, we got to make sure people are running and productive, because if they're not running, we're losing money. And that totally changes the mindset of operations. It totally changes the mindset in maintenance and everywhere else, that they have to be focused on maximizing the efficiency of their drivers, not worrying about nickel and dime stuff, but making sure that drivers are covered makes people sort of focus on that effectiveness and make sure there's no roadblocks that are getting in the way for the drivers. A very different approach.
Yeah, and one of the things also I was going to ask him about was the shared leadership. So he shares the co-president title with his brother, and family businesses. You hear stories all the time about conflict and power struggles. But based on what I've read and some anecdotes I've heard about Boyle, it works for them. And one of the things that I've observed with other top performing companies is whether it's documented or not by title, there are many top performing best fleets companies that do have a kind of a shared leadership style. They pick the items or the departments or operational strategies that fit their personality, and then push the other stuff over to the other complementary person or person. So that's one thing I want to jump in and talk about. It. You seem like a very unique and sophisticated duo.
Yeah, and I think I can echo that by the fact that I don't know if I've ever even spoken to Mark. I think I've only ever talked to Andrew. He's the one who's
Mm-hmm.
mostly the public face of things, certainly doing the media and doing the Best Fleets interviews and coming to the convention and other events. So they do seem to have really split their tasks in a nice way to see who's good at something or interested, and then sort of divide it from there. So obviously it works for them, but um, something else that I think is very interesting, you mentioned them being a family business, and there's certainly plenty of those, but they have the unique perspective that they have spent time outside of the industry as well,
Mm-hmm.
which we find makes a huge difference. People that have spent all their lives in the industry sometimes can be a little bit insular. They're not really aware of some of the things that are happening outside of it. They just look at everything through the lens of trucking. But people that have worked outside of it, like Andrew for sure, and his brother, I think as well, have that outside perspective to see different ways of things being done in the non-trucking world. And that brings a whole different balance into the equation when you start thinking about, okay, well, this is what we want to do. Okay, well, this is how it gets done elsewhere. How are we going to do it here? Okay, we can make a variation of things and come up with some ideas that maybe are atypical in trucking. And I think that's where some of the things I was just talking about sort of fit in, is that it's commonplace outside of trucking. So if you're experienced in those other places, you come in and you say, well, yeah, we really should be paying people for their time, and we should be giving them a cell phone and an email account so they can actually communicate with us as part of the business. All of that kind of stuff that's very standard outside of trucking. So they kind of bring a bit of a muckraker personality in to say, well, we're not going to do it the way everybody else does. We're going to do it the way we think is best. And it really works for them, and certainly stirs it up for everybody else.
Yeah, it's refreshing. And I guess the one thing I definitely have to bring up, just due to what's happened over the last 18 months, is is Boyle's participation in the vaccination rollout in the U.S. So
Hmm.
if you were paying attention to Fox News or CNBC during the first deliveries of the vaccine, you would have seen either a Penske or a Boyle truck pulling out of that warehouse in Michigan.
Hmm.
So Andrew was featured multiple times on air talking about that rollout, and they were very proud to be part of that. So I wanted to get his perspective on the vaccination rollout process, as well as how they adapted during the initial stages of the COVID-19
Hmm.
pandemic. So,
Yeah, and a different business being all team drivers
mhm.
would likely have had some challenges for them there. But I think the investments that they've made in focusing their business in particular types of cargo really paid off when it came time for something like vaccine distribution. They're used to doing high security stuff. They're used to doing things that are very sensitive. So it was a good fit for them that way. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear the challenges and the way they addressed all of those things.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for providing your perspective and your observations from previous years. I'm treating this as a really great opportunity to extract some great strategies and tactics from one of the best in the industry. So
Yeah.
definitely adding some of your insights to the questions will be great. So
No, it should be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing the final product.
awesome. Well, thank you very much, and we'll definitely be talking to you very soon.
Okay. Thank
All right,
you.
take care. Well, Andrew Boyle, welcome to the Best Fleets podcast. We're honored to have you on this show.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Oh, great. So, as I mentioned in the intro, Andrew is the co-president and CFO of Boyle Transportation. He's also the vice chair of the American Trucking Associations and heavily involved in ATRI. So, beyond that, Andrew, can you give us a little bit of a bio of you personally? Also, a little bit of a history on Boyle, and the co-president situation. So that's a unique thing, but something that I've seen work extremely well with other trucking companies. So
Sure. Yeah. So more interesting is probably the company's history. So, and what's neat, as you can appreciate, is much of this industry is made up of folks who've kind of started from scratch and hustled, and
mhm.
we're not that different. Our company is actually 50 years old this year. And
Congrats.
so my old man, my folks were hustlers. They didn't go to college. My old man was in the Army. Then he was in the state police here in Massachusetts, and then left and was selling for a freight company, saw an opportunity. The company didn't want to pursue that business. And at the time, the industry was regulated. So an operating authority was much like a taxi medallion, where there were almost a fixed number of them because it was regulated by the government. So he saw that a fella in the classified ads was selling his operating authority and bought it off of him. And then, he's kind of started one guy in a truck, typical story.
Mhm.
And my mother would do the books. And over time, we gradually grew to, oh my gosh, 5 trucks. And wow, we're going all the way to Virginia. And at some point, maybe it was 19 in the 80s, while we went all the way to California, and then just kind of gradually grew. So my folks ran the company for about 32 years. My 2 older brothers and I grew up working here in a manual capacity, and then, kind of other functions as we, grew in our education and so forth. So my oldest brother, Mark, and I are the second generation owners and operators of the company. We each worked here after college, me for about 4 years, Mark for about 10 or 12, and then we each went to graduate school. We both worked elsewhere. I worked in investment banking, so kind of did the Wall Street thing for 3 years, and then he and I returned in 2003,
Mhm.
so 18 years ago, and we bought our folks out over time, but they left within 6 months of our return because
Wow.
we're pretty familiar with it, and we have a great team here, and many of whom we retained. So yeah, so that's a little bit of the story, and we do believe very much in industry engagement at the trade association level, and many of these great programs, such as the Best Fleets to Drive For, help make us better.
That's awesome.
And
Um,
with respect to, yeah, the co-president thing, my Mark and I have complementary skills.
mhm.
So there's not a ton of overlap. Yet even when we refurbished our office, we elected to share an office. So we're very, very close and can communicate freely both between each other and among our staff. But yeah, kind of knowing each other's domain, there's not a lot of wasted motion.
That's awesome. And it's funny because that idea may seem foreign to some companies. But one of the common themes I've picked out, not just through Best Fleets, but also through the TCA profitability program, is the top performing companies also seem to have some form of shared leadership. And I could actually pick out the names, probably the top 10, with those two people or three people that do this kind of shared leadership type format. And it seems to be some kind of a winning formula if you have the right people. So it's nice that you have that, and it's also your brother. So
yeah, and when you think how dynamic our industry is, and it's not a month to month type of business, right? And it's not even week to week, but it's an hour to hour, day to day business. So there's too much velocity of activity happening that if you were to bottleneck it with a single individual, you couldn't move forward very well.
Awesome. Well, speaking about Best Fleets, how are you? So right now, you guys are now a 7-time winner in 7 years of participation, which is pretty unheard of. Typically,
It's roughly 100% hit rate, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's unheard of because most companies will have a couple of years where they're getting warming up to the program and how you submit and answer your questions and get their operations in line. But you guys hit the ground running. 7 years, 7-time winner, and you even an overall winner in 2020. So congrats. But how were you guys originally introduced to Best Fleets?
Yeah, so we had been TCA members for a handful of years, but weren't that active. And then our recruiting and retention manager at the time, who has since retired, an incredible guy, Jerry Ham, became aware of the program. And he, historically, we've kept a very low profile. So we haven't really participated. We historically, up until, 7, 8 years ago, hadn't participated a lot in recognition programs or marketing of any sort. Just partly due to the nature of our business, we try to keep a low profile, but we're also competitive. And I let you and I discuss briefly our basketball backgrounds, right? I like to get after it. We like to compete. And so this program is just such a great one for kind of the good peer pressure, right? And I love to compete on the basis of the way we treat our people. That's the greatest source of pride that we have. Hey, we're all in business to make a good living, right? To work for a living, have financial objectives, certainly, but you also like to have a purpose. In the greatest, not only do we get to have the privilege and honor of doing very important work, but personally, what I find the most gratifying is creating good blue collar jobs and good jobs in general. So to have a basis from which to measure whether you're actually creating jobs or good jobs is something I totally embrace. So he nudged us on that, and it's continued. We have 3 key team members: our HR manager, our safety and quality manager, and then our recruiting and retention manager. And they drive the process, and I get to participate. So we love the fact that we're really proud of our people, and we're thrilled that Jerry nudged us into this direction. And since then, it's something that we've embraced wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and that key distinction of jobs versus good jobs. So that's a nice important point. And I was going to ask this a little bit later, but something that you display publicly on your website, but also within the Best Fleet submission each year, is your virtuous cycle. Can you speak to or tell our audience more about what that is and what that means to Boyle?
Yeah. So virtuous circle. So, we discussed mentioned the distinction between jobs and good jobs. So there's actually this group at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I think they call it the Good Jobs Project. And I remember reading several, several years ago, I read a piece about them, and through the lens of this company in Manhattan that was doing office cleaning. Okay, so when you think of office cleaning, right, it's typically price-oriented, high turnover, kind of low skilled labor type of environment. So you have this downward spiral where people don't get paid very well. They have high turnover, and the customer experience is less than stellar. So then the customer starts directing much of their purchasing decision on the basis of price. Wow, did I see some analogies? Right. It hit home. So what this kind of case study was that this one company decided, you know what, we're going to pay people more, and particularly the employees had not only did they have lower wages and kind of low, kind of minimal, if any, benefits, but they also had a schedule that was totally unpredictable. And it's also the case in many retail jobs, right? And then you get this downward spiral. The customer doesn't have a good experience, and then it becomes a price game, race to the bottom. So this company in Manhattan kind of said, well, hey, we're going to give people predictable schedules. They're going to pay a little bit more, and then we're going to give them some performance incentives. And then all of a sudden, they had better retention. The customers were more pleased with their experience. And then, if anything, they were able to upsell or cross-sell other types of services. Hey, we're going to manage other things about your office for you. So drew that analogy, and we had already taken many steps that were already in place, but I did enjoy reading that and making this distinction between jobs and good jobs. So for me, when I look at our industry, truckload in particular, right, with high turnover, there is this downward spiral. So you can say, hey, many companies do, why should we invest in benefits and wages and stuff if we know people are going to leave?
Loser mentality. Yeah.
Right. So we long ago, we've always had some component of our compensation structure that was guaranteed, but we switched to this kind of easier to understand, more transparent setting probably like 10, 11 years ago. I believe we were one of the first, carriers to do it. And since, you're welcome, everybody, for copying our model. But, the two greatest factors, in my opinion, as to why people churn through are you're away from home, and then you have a lot of volatility in your earnings because a lot of the factors are beyond your control. And then you have a lot of volatility in your schedule. You don't know when you're going to be home and for how long.
And that's
that job.
Yeah, and that's something that I get on a soapbox about. It not necessarily is the amount of compensation; it's that predictability, that consistency, and things that we take for granted. For those who get paid consistently the same every 2 weeks or whatever it is, whatever interval time it is your ability to, obtain credit, for example. If you're an underwriter of a loan and you see that 1 week or 1 2 week period you're making, $500, and the next one you're making 3,000, that's deemed a risk that they have to play into. So they're either going to be given the loan at a higher interest rate, or they're not going to be given the loan at all. So that lubrication of upward mobility is removed for a lot of people. So that consistency is something I am totally on the same soapbox with you about.
Yeah, and we do both. We do very high and consistent. So now our first year, guarantee weekly wage is $1,700 a person.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, that's pretty good eating. But more importantly, you mentioned kind of the behavioral economics part of it. So we do very important work, right? We're either transporting critical material for military service members, or we're hauling, in many cases, life-saving medicine. So if I go to a customer or a client and I say, most of the trucks you drive behind say, hey, drive for us at X cents per mile, right? And oh yeah, I see those, right? So if your motivation is if you want to make a good living, you're only getting paid by the mile. Well, how are you going to achieve good compensation? It's either by driving a lot of miles. Well, how do you drive a lot of miles? You drive, fast or erratically or over on your hours, right? Particularly pre-electronic logs, those are all happening with great frequency.
Yep.
And I ask the client, well, given the type of product you're entrusting to us, is that what you want somebody to do? And they all shake their head. No, no, no. Well, why would you engage a carrier on incense people on that basis? So our folks, we structure around quality, safety, and security because that's what we sell. Do things right, right? Do things right. We're not going to do crazy numbers of miles each week. We're going to do things right, and that's what we're selling, and we're aligning the incentives accordingly. And then furthermore, we're doing, if most fleets do 1 day off for every week on the road, we're doing 2 days off for every week on the road. So excuse me, you're either home each weekend or, for 2 days a week, not necessarily the weekend, or you're going to go out for 3 or 4 weeks and then get a full week off. Like, then you can have a life, what your income's going to be, you can have your home time and so forth. So those two components, as you can imagine, the compensation and the downtime are the most costly, the two biggest cost drivers in our industry. But they're also, so if you ignore them, you're going to suffer the downward spiral. So quite simply, in a nutshell, this virtuous circle, and we visualize it for folks with an image showing that as an employer, we're investing in exceptional people who provide a great experience to our customer. In turn, the customer has a good experience and wants to keep doing business with us. So you get this continual loop or virtuous circle. And it's a pretty simple concept, but not many execute it.
Very good. And I've made a note of the Good Jobs Project. I'm going to look that up after our call. So very good answer. So one of the things that I picked out too is just by the nature of the freight you mentioned, the hauler, the customers and companies and agencies that you work with, there's a lot of, from outside looking in, external compliance that you have to deal with. Now, I spent about 17 years in the insurance industry, and we had regulators that we had to work with every 6 months. We did claims management, so we had to comply with a lot of different regulations. And for the first 3 years, I was like, man, this sucks. It's just something extra that we have to do. But after a while, you start thinking, let's embrace this. Let's embrace kind of the suck of it and build from it. So do you guys approach these external audits and being under the microscope a little bit different way? And does that kind of work the same way with Best Fleets?
So as you can appreciate, much of our industry is made up of kind of generic, commoditized services.
Yep.
And many people can apply for jobs where you fill out an online form and within an hour, you get a response, yes, show up on Monday, you have a job.
Yep.
So that's great for a lot of people. You want an easy to do type of service for customers. There's that. And then you want an easy to get job. There you go. There are plenty of those. That's not us. So we're not selling the Walmart approach. The Walmart, we're selling all things at the low price, right? And easy to get. That's not us. We're selling the Apple Store experience, right? Premium product, premium experience. And it is to develop that is more cumbersome. So yeah, embrace the suck, as you said. Yeah, I mean, things that are more cumbersome and more difficult are the things that we embrace. So we can't compete on this kind of general cargo, general freight, commoditized service. We just wouldn't be good at that. Others are much better at that. What we do, yeah, you're correct. So some of our government work requires a lot of standards of care and compliance, and we embrace that. And then about 12 years ago, we had to kind of look in the mirror because we needed to address other markets. And when we figured out what are we good at, how can we serve other clients? Well, some of those clients weren't so easy to get, right? They took 5, 6, 7, even 8 years to get on board with some of these clients. And when you can either complain about that, or if they come and send an army of auditors, like quality auditors with some frequency every 2 or 3 years, they say the two biggest lies in auditing are, it's good to see you and we're here to help. But we, you can either be obstinate and say, no, I'm not doing that. That's a pain. Or you can embrace it as free consulting and say, this is part of our continuous improvement program, much like we do with our professional drivers and other employees kind of internally. We all have to be committed to continuous improvement. But furthermore, if you're serving clients, you have to continually get better too. Otherwise, you're left in the dust. This is capitalism. This is a free market, and you have to continually get better. And so, you can either, complain about it or get on board. We chose the
Nice. Well stated. Well stated. So I noticed too that you spend a lot of time in your submissions discussing or illustrating the importance of your professional drivers advisory committee. Can you talk to our audience about the importance of that feedback loop internally?
Yeah, sure. So we do monthly calls, and so we have a handful of representatives. I think it's 4 or 5 folks who are professional drivers, and our HR manager, our recruiting and retention manager, and then a member of our operations team as well. So yeah, it's very useful. So simple tweaks here and there. Hey, we need a little bit more info on our that we have a mobile app that our professional drivers use to get their dispatch assignments and stuff. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to incorporate on-site references. So for example, hey, where to enter specifically and which gate to get in and out of a location. That's been a good piece of feedback that we're trying to incorporate into our software development. Equipment specifications. So yeah, that was established a couple of years ago, and it's been very useful for us. And we have a lot of thoughtful people. And as you can imagine, not every suggestion are we going to be able to incorporate, right? If it's cost prohibitive, if it's kind of a one-off thing as opposed to something that's systemic, that's the distinction you want to make. But it's very useful to get our the feedback and the input from the practitioners.
And speaking of that too, one of the things that we've seen emerging is the creation of a line item within companies' budgets for research and development. So that's something that I started noticing a couple of years ago prior to joining Carrier's Edge and Best Fleets. And now we're starting to hear more people talk about it. So they're almost approaching them like a product development or technology or software company where this is what we're going to invest in new technology and new ideas in general. One company in particular is kind of forming a skunkworks project where they don't have any accountability to or they can do whatever they want within this framework outside, and their whole concept is to form new ideas around compensation, around pricing, around warehousing, those kind of things. How do you guys think of things that way? Do you have a budget for training and development that applies to both drivers and non-drivers?
Oh, well, certainly the training, yes, including Carrier's Edge in our toolbox. But so we long ago deployed company-owned smartphones to the professional drivers starting, I think it was like 6-7 years ago. I forget how long it was ago. Wow. Now, so much so that at the time, maybe half of our people had never handled a smartphone before. So now that learning curve has been flattened. So we have, and everybody's issued a corporate email account.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah.
So that's not common. So that does create, because when you think about it, so we run a team operation, half of your folks are working at night. So you don't want to disrupt them during the day. So it just eases communication flow significantly. And then, but with respect to advanced technology, so we're an early adopter for onboard safety systems, for example. We always have, for 20 years, we've had, emergency braking, radar oriented stuff, and then, continued. I was shocked just to learn, we've always, some of our truck manufacturing or truck deliveries have been delayed because we've always put in airbags. And I was shocked did you know the take rate for airbags in Class 8 tractors is in the single digits?
What?
I was shocked. I was shocked. So we, like a year ago that came up, I said, no, we're going to wait as long as it takes. I'm not taking trucks without airbags. But yeah, it's not even 10%, I believe.
I didn't know that. What kind of delay is that if you elect to have in a normal
Well, in
environment?
a typical normal environment, there's none, but
Okay.
there were some delays associated with the suppliers a year ago. And
Oh, okay. And
we weren't, so, hey, do you want to just take it without airbags like 92% of your peers? I said, no, absolutely not. So that's an aside. So we're early adopters on safety technologies. And then furthermore, we have even though we're in the transportation, the logistics business, we're a software company too. So we have 4 full-time software developers.
wow.
So we have a professional driver facing mobile app that is quite slick, for dispatch assignments and so forth, and other means of uploading documentation, payroll, et cetera. And then that we developed, it's custom for us. Then the client-facing site and email notifications are really rich and slick in their interface with overlaid on a Google map, et cetera. And now we're orienting our team more toward internal stuff. So we have our order management system needs to be more advanced, and ultimately to what you're talking about, we're looking at if we can get that to a point where, and it's still a lot of our load planning process is still quite manual because we have people who've been doing this for decades who are experts, but we're trying to get to a point where we can layer on top of that some AI and optimization for everybody's benefit. When you think about assigning whether to accept business and then on what resource to assign it, talk about a multivariable problem.
Right.
You probably, you might have dozens of variables. Okay, this team needs to be home at a certain time. Who's in what position? What's the pricing? What are the costs associated with it? And then other kind of demands are such that it's quite extensive, right? So to the extent to answer your question, that's what our software team is doing now, is laying the base so that we can layer on top of that some advanced decision support tools.
That's awesome. I love to see companies investing in their own proprietary software, in addition to the stuff that you have to do by nature of the freight and the companies you work with. Having your own proprietary software is a competitive advantage, and more companies need to understand that instead of just always defaulting to off-the-shelf solutions. So
it'd be lovely if there was one that was appropriate for us, but
right.
So far not so much. And furthermore, you want to engineer as much as possible on the front end to ease the burden, say, on our professional drivers, right? Whether it's routing or other assignments that can lighten their load, and so they can just simply drive safely. That's where we're trying to get to more and more, particularly as you can appreciate, more millennials are used to like plugging in their phone to Waze and just starting to drive. We're not going to get to that point. This is a profession, but we do want to engineer more to lighten their load.
Nice, very nice. So pivoting a little bit, Boyle was the first truck I saw on TV when the COVID vaccines, I believe it was the Pfizer one, were distributed in the U.S. So I believe you were on Fox News and CNBC. So obviously a big disruptive change for the industry. Lots of variables that you can't plug into software you encountered. Can you do a debrief on what COVID was like for Boyle over the past 18 months?
Yeah. So, well, boy, that's a broader question, but with respect to, we do have the honor of doing important work on a daily basis, year round. And we transport things like vaccines on a normal basis, or oncology drugs, or, as I tell our new folks, look, you're going to transport either critical material to support military service members. Many of our folks are veterans, or furthermore, the life-saving medicine we talked about. And I can guarantee either you or someone you care about is going to take medicine that you've delivered. So what a great honor. And in this case, so we do that on a normal basis. And, there is a global network and, North American network that is established in protocols for the transportation of medicine. So we all, and those of us who participate in it, have always known this. but yes, for 49 plus years, our company has kept a very low profile for that. But that one day in December, we had no choice. Where, the initial launch, we were entrusted that with that mission in, continued, right? So we're doing that type of work all the time. But yeah, that was a first of all, we designated one of our female professional drivers to be the one to do that initial launch. And she was interviewed by a couple of media outlets like the Wall Street Journal and Reuters afterward, to promote women in trucking. And look, it's been a measurable time for all of us. And the fact that we get to ply our trade to contribute to the effort to quash this scourge of a virus is an extraordinary honor. And our people have really stepped up, and it feels, you definitely get to puff out your chest a little bit. But what I try to do in all the media that we did at that time is direct it not just at our company, but to the greater industry. When you see like the guy loading the trucks on the guy working the forklift. Chris, I grew up on a forklift. When you're not talking about pressure in the seventh game in the NBA Finals at the foul line, or in the Stanley Cup or at the World Series, don't tell me about the 18th hole at the Masters making a winning putt being pressure. If you're driving the forklift
for the first load,
and all these cameras are watching you, that is pressure, man.
Yeah.
And so he did fantastically well. But also, professional truck drivers, pilots, air cargo handlers, all package delivery drivers, all those folks, right? These people who we all know are vital year round, they got a little bit of visibility too. And that's what I tried to do, when I did a lot of interviews, is direct the attention not just at our company, but to all these folks who they're not scientists, they're not regulators or politicians, but they're serving their role. And I think they're really proud, and it was neat to have them highlighted.
No, again, very well stated. So kudos to all that work that you and your team have done. And one of the things you mentioned there was you made it a point of utilizing one of your female drivers for that particular load and that day. Today actually marks, for those who are going to see this in the future, today is June 1st, and this marks the launch of the Diversity Inclusion Index in partnership with Women in Trucking. So on that note, can you talk about why diversity and inclusion is important to Boyle?
Yeah, sure. So we're very fortunate, first of all, to have, I think it's roughly 38% of our fleet is female professional drivers, which is awesome.
Which is massive, actually, compared to the industry. Yeah.
Sure. And so that's, and we have many key, we have great, diversity, both, gender and ethnicity in our management team. And, we're a small to medium sized company. So we can't have as mature a program or prescriptive a program as a several thousand person company. But, certainly that's a continual objective of ours, because it makes us better. And whether we're serving our clients or serving our internal customers, our coworkers, right? We want to have multiple perspectives and diversity, not just of race and ethnicity and gender and so forth and sexual orientation, but we also wanted diversity of opinion and thought. That's equally important. And
a lot of times that's a byproduct of the feedback we get, is that's a byproduct of doing those other things. Is diversity of people gives you diverse ideas, and the virtuous circle continues.
Yeah, and I'm on the American Trucking Association's diversity committee that we put together recently. So many of us, the folks who are at the big companies, are going to kind of put together their playbook that they suggest for the industry at large. And in the States, I forget what year, if it's at 2040, perhaps we become a majority minority country.
Yeah, population.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, so just look at demographics. It's not, shouldn't be like a choice. We should all just get on board. But I don't want to give the impression that we have this very formal program internally, because we at our scale, we're not quite at the point where we have this established playbook, but we're going to benefit through industry participation in some of the other the methodologies that we can all benefit from.
Yeah, you're definitely making efforts, so that's a key part for sure. So pivoting a little bit, so I know you're on the board of ATRI, and one of the big topics recently is infrastructure funding, and the proposed vehicle miles travel tax. So can you talk a little bit about that and the different options? And I just find it a very hard one to contemplate a solution for. I have a couple ideas in mind, but they probably wouldn't be practical. But even just looking at the VMT tax, it's hard to, compared to what we have today with fuel tax, hard to contemplate a as easy, administratively easy solution compared to that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So say roughly when you're paying fuel taxes, like how many cents on the dollar are going toward the actual need toward infrastructure funding? So with fuel taxes, it's only 1% administrative costs roughly. So 99 cents in the dollar goes into the pool for actual, spending on and investing in infrastructure. With other means, so even tolling, even with the kind of transponder tolling, it's still in the 20s, even close to 30% is an admin cost. And now with VMT, it's estimated more like 40%. So that's the fundamental problem. I think we can all agree here we are, we have an antiquated methodology, fuel economy is improving, and you have a lot of electrification on the passenger vehicle side. And, at some point, maybe in the heavy duty side, but boy, so we have an antiquated methodology. We have to improve that. What we've been suggesting for years through ATA is, hey, let's just, for now, right off the bat, we're willing to pay more. Let's step up the fuel surcharge, fuel tax, because it's a conservative approach because you're most efficient. But yes, we need some sort of methodology. Right now, there are only about 200 taxpayers because it's caught at the rack.
Yeah.
So that's very efficient. Whereas with VMT, if you have every vehicle has a dongle, I guess, right, that's plugged into your diagnostic port in your car and you're reporting it, you'd go to hundreds of millions of taxpayers in the States. Right. So just think, and then you have, okay, does everybody have their dongle or, transponder tied to a verifiable bank account or credit card, and you're going to administer that. And then you have the cellular connectivity from the dongle to track the vehicle. So, theoretically, I do agree that that's probably a VMT of some sort is probably the way we need to get where we need to get to. It's logical, but it's just right now we're not in position to enact that, and it would just be a huge amount of waste. So maybe we have to use the existing infrastructure. Should EVs be paying through the existing infrastructure through registration fees and other through the existing state or other means of collection? There are some constitutional impediments apparently. I don't know that full story, but yeah, we need to do something. We need a hybrid format, but we're not ready right now, particularly as you can appreciate, a lot of Americans are not so fond of government agencies tracking their vehicle wherever they go. So there's a lot of complexity, but we need to get there at some point. It's easier with commercial vehicles than with passenger vehicles, but you can't just do it for one. We're already paying a disproportionate share, which we don't dispute. That's logical, but you can't make it even more disproportionate.
Yeah, you can't widen the gap, and that's the thing. Like, first of all, ATRI put out a wonderful report on this. It's a PDF that you can download for free from the website. So,
truckingresearch.org.
Yeah. So definitely check that out. But I think one of the hybrid models that was coming around in my mind was activity-based insurance is coming, undoubtedly. So that is a method of auditing and fixing issues from a compliance point of view and preventing quote unquote hackers from entering the model. So when you have all those different payers, like you mentioned on a BMT, you're going to have not only people not paying, but also people hacking the system. If there was a way to force the issue with the activity-based insurance, perhaps that's a way to, not only handle the hacking piece, but also the collection piece. Narrow it down to a more focused set of pairs. But man, tough problem to solve. So,
Yeah.
so good work being part of that. So a couple more things before we let you go. And again, thank you for taking the time. This has been a wonderful conversation. So outside of trucking, you're involved in basketball. You're a basketball sports fan. You're a sports nut. Tell me a little bit more about the Hole in the Wall gang camp that you're part of, and what that is, and how you got involved with that.
Oh, well, thanks for asking. Yeah, so in the early 90s, I became associated with the camp. So I was a counselor there for 2 full summers. So Paul Newman, the actor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic actor. He had the foresight in it was the late 80s. He established this camp in Connecticut, and it's for children who have life-threatening illnesses. So, and many of whom are, in meet economic challenges as well. So much of the year they spend out of school because they might be getting treatment or they're in the hospital and so forth. And they, so a typical camp doesn't suit them. So this is a specially configured camp and with resources to support kids to have a normal camping experience among peers too, to have that connection with peers
Right.
who are in similar circumstances. If you're 12 years old and you're out of school much of the year due to cancer treatment, and you get to meet other kids who are in the same level, wow, what a difference that is to your world, because you're kind of almost ostracized from your peer group typically, and isolated. So it's a fantastic place. I had the good fortune as a younger person to be a full timer, and then I went back for 6 or 7 years. I volunteered for 1 week a year, and then for the last 25 years, I've been, financially supporting the camp. But a brilliant move that Mr. Newman made, in my opinion, was that he established, his food products, the
Newman's Own.
Right,
Yep.
Newman's Own. So the salad dressing, the food products, and all that sort of stuff, that helped get the camp going. But the brilliance is that he created a for-profit business. So Newman's Own is a for-profit business.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to just going around to Hollywood types and say, hey, can you lend me or throw in some money for nonprofit? That's a one-time event.
Mm-hmm.
The food products are, despite his having passed away, I think it was 10 plus years now ago, it lives on in perpetuity, and that helps finance the camp. The camp is an independent entity, but that really helps finance it to a large extent. And, to set up a for-profit business, as we can appreciate, right? That economic development is self-sustaining as opposed to a one-time event.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They do great work. It certainly changed my life, because yes, I did get to play sports in college, but then this helped reset kind of there are other ways to reach people through play and recreation that don't always have to be in the most competitive dynamic, right? But
For sure.
Equally great outcomes.
Yeah, definitely probably a grounding experience as well.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Well, and that is one thing too, when you mentioned the connection, I can assume that with the advent of social networks has helped these types of networks of kids that were disconnected and maybe only got connected at one time a year. It's probably helped them connect permanently and stay connected via social media.
Yes, they had, last year there was neither last summer, because a lot of the kids are immunocompromised, so they couldn't do camp last summer, and they're not doing it again this year. But they're having some family pod type of setup. So yeah, they have a virtual platform for that. I think we've all reached a point of virtual fatigue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate you doing this on Zoom. You're probably sick of Zooms, but no, this is good. So the last question, it's kind of a 3-part thing. It's more kind of personal and business. What are the 3 best decisions you've ever made, business and personal? if you could rank them?
Yeah. Wow. Well, business-wise, about 12 years ago, we were facing dynamics in our industry. We were almost completely exposed to defense and government work. And, there are a lot of dynamics at play. The federal government shutdowns, the budget constraints. They went to more of a pricing-based decision. It's all transactional. So at that point, you have to take a look in the mirror. Again, this is capitalism, adapt or die. And had we continued doing just exactly what we were doing, we would have had to shrink the company. But we took a look in the mirror, said, what are we good at? And then try to apply that to other types of clients who value our quality, safety, and security. And it took a lot of work and a lot of humble pie and a lot of failures. So whether it's at other points in your life, if you were into athletics clearly, or hard work on a farm, or many people have different type of life experiences that prepare them for getting kicked and knocked down. But there's no entitlement program for motor carriers, so you got to get up and make it happen. And there was a lot of that where we had incurred some failure and had to get up and keep fighting and knock down some other doors. So that kind of pivot was one of the better decisions, to not feel sorry for yourself, but to make something happen and adapt accordingly. And then I guess in the last year, we've all been presented with a lot of personal challenges and then business challenges, and we're responsible. I consider myself responsible for all of our coworkers and teammates. And so a year ago in March, when we were kind of all staring into the abyss, we didn't know what was about to come our way. But we knew we had to keep plowing forward because the types of commodities that we transport are vital for life-sustaining medicine. So my brother Mark and I decided, hey, we announced to our teammates, we're going to give up 6 months worth of salary, and we're going to pay that amount out at the end of 6 months to all of our teammates who continued, working. So each of our professional drivers and mechanics who were with us for that duration got an extra $1,500 at the end of that period. So a little bit of, personal sacrifice to make sure our people knew how much we valued them. And then the last one, I'd say the PPP. Are you familiar with that here? Right.
Yep.
The state, right? So it's Paycheck Protection Program. So again, last March, April, we didn't know, many of our customers were shutting down for a certain period of time. So we did take a PPP loan, not knowing what was happening. And so it was really just the second quarter for us where we took a big hit. But come the fall, as you know, most of trucking rebounded quite well.
Yeah.
Right. So then you're sitting there in like November, I'm thinking, geez, we got that, government assistance, but we took the amount that we were qualified to take, and all of it was going to be qualified to be forgiven. Right. So we met all the criteria, but that doesn't make it right. So we kind of looked back and said, what was the actual economic harm we incurred? From extra costs to also the depleted revenue because of our customers shutting down. And we kind of calculate what that was. Well, it was about 60% of what we took. So guess what we did, Chris? Like anyone would normally do in most situations, we took the remaining 40% and we gave it back.
Nice.
Now,
which would be extremely rare based on what I'm hearing. So,
right. Which people would say, hey, that's free money. There's no such thing as free money, right? And and that has to be recouped through taxes at some point. And if you're I didn't feel comfortable asking, my neighbors and friends and coworkers to pay taxes for that if it was not justifiable. So you'd be surprised, the process of giving that back was actually so cumbersome. At some points I thought, geez, maybe we shouldn't have done this. But
you probably had many people saying, just keep it, just keep it, just keep it.
Yeah. In our bank, our Boston-based bank, which had tens of thousands of those PPP loans that they processed, they said we were the only one that they knew of. but that wasn't going to distract us, because I have friends, just like you mentioned earlier, and others who are in industries where there was nothing they could do, and they were getting clobbered, and they needed to retain their people. And that wasn't the case with us. It was only case for a certain portion of that total amount. So we gave that back. And so that was another decision we made that I think, it's the same stuff we learn in kindergarten, right?
For sure.
You just kind of get detracted sometimes along the way, and you have to kind of get back to the same decision-making process you would have made as a kindergartner.
For sure. And these are self-perpetuating standards that, will, by osmosis and by observation, everyone on your team will take into account. So it may hurt short term, but long term definitely pays off.
Yeah, and I think look, all I know is if motor carriers or any businesses who took those loans and didn't really need them and didn't give that amount back, all I know is for the rest of your life, you have no license to complain about taxes.
For sure. That's a great line to end on. We'll put that in bold on your quote.
I don't want to antagonize anybody, but
yeah, no, for sure. No, well, Andrew, this was awesome. This was a great conversation, and I know our audience is going to love hearing it. So thanks again for taking the time. And your final thought for those who are considering getting involved in Best Fleets that may have not looked at it, or maybe just did a cursory submission a couple years ago, can you kind of give your thoughts on why they should?
Oh, it's an awesome program. So you got to be wedded to continuous improvement. If you're going to take a shot and miss and then complain about it, this probably isn't for you, because it's not that easy. And a friend of mine from Carbon Express,
Yep.
Steve Rush.
Steve? Yep.
So Steve was deterred initially, and then he and I talked about it. I really encouraged him, because no matter what, you're going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are your most valuable? We spend a ton of money on equipment, ton of money on technology, ton of money on facilities, but our most important assets are what? Our people, and that's where most of the money goes. So this helps you get better at, your people. And even if you don't become a top 20 immediately, or it takes several years, it's still an opportunity to get better. So if you don't want to get better, forget it.
Yeah, just ignore it.
Yeah, and this is not a paid sponsorship type of gig, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are used to these kind of recognition programs where, you drop 10 grand and then all of a sudden you're the winner or something. No, this is a metric-driven, comprehensive program. So you're not gonna. We even each year there are a couple categories where we're never really going to get there unless we do something dramatically different structurally. So it's not. So that's okay. But you have all these metrics under which you can kind of, it'll give you guidelines and points of reference, which is awesome. Like we said earlier, sometimes peer pressure is good.
Absolutely, that's great. Well, thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you perhaps in Vegas in September.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, there you have it. A great conversation with Andrew Boyle, as expected. As always, Andrew shared some unique insights that will eventually permeate the entire industry. Thanks for being a leader, Andrew. For our next episode, we'll be joined by Brian Filko. He's the CEO of Jetco Delivery and EVP of the GTI Group. And they're also a first-time Best Fleets participant and winner in their first year. Until then, stay safe and make sure you subscribe to the Best Fleets podcast via your favorite podcast app or via YouTube. Thank you.